Welcome to this evening's news program. I'm your host and editor, Diana Longery. Thank you for tuning in. This evening we're going to continue with our final report on the July 25th, 2019 meeting of the Rush Line Advisory Policy Committee. Now, we have covered this meeting on several other news programs, and tonight we are going to focus primarily on a couple of interviews that we had after that meeting that I think you'll find very insightful and hopefully informative as well. Now, to help me with this report is my co-anchor, Mr. Kevin Berglund. Thank you, Mr. Berglund, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Mr. Berglund, you were here at this meeting and you did the film recording, correct?
Absolutely. This occurred in the middle of the afternoon, and you would think that Ramsey County, because they're so committed to open government, transparency, and all these, the open conversation and citizen engagement, you would think, you know, at the very least, even if they're going to have the meeting in the middle of the afternoon where virtually nobody can attend, they would at the very least insisted that it would be audio taped. And you would hope that because of their high and deep commitment to transparency, they would videotape it and show it on their cable channel or show it on their channel on the internet.
Right.
But of course, they did none of it.
We are told time and time again how technology has made transparency and being able to communicate to the public so easy and so cost effective, and that everybody is filming things on their phones now and can put anything on the YouTube. My goodness, if a member of the public can do it, certainly don't you think a governmental entity could do it?
Especially when, for all practical purposes, money is generally of no issue to a government. If they don't have the money, they just borrow the money, and money for something as simple and as easily done would be add to their legitimacy. So, and of course we know that the Ramsey County Commissioners, including Vicki Reinhardt, the county manager, are always instructing us how they're moving forward, they're moving forward, they're moving forward, everything they're doing is moving forward. But it seems like, at least when it comes to open government and transparency, at least in the Ramsey County case, it's always moving backwards, taking another step backwards, going backwards.
Pretty soon we're just going to be in a dark closet. So we have film footage here, as I indicated, that is after the meeting. Mr. Berglund, you want to set this up as to, you know, where we are in the meeting and who the individuals are that you're interviewing?
And of course, this is after the meeting in the middle of the afternoon at the end of July in a small room they have over at the Maplewood Community Center. So the meeting is over and close. I'm staying there to get some reactions, and very close to me is Daryl, who is interested in talking, and he's one of the, or not an appointed member of this board, that is going to be going to Richmond, Virginia to see their Pulse, their bus rapid transit system. And next to him is Terry Tao. Terry Tao has been on many committees. I believe she might have been on the St. Paul Planning Commission. She is now running for Ward 6 in the city of St. Paul. After Dan Bostrom left that seat, long-term former school board member, former police officer, many year member of the St. Paul City Council, left the seat, there is a competitive race. So Terry Tao is one who signed up by the August 13th deadline to run for this Ward 6, where I think 6 people are competing for that 6.
So just to be clear then, she is a member of this advisory commission.
Absolutely.
This Rush Line Advisory Committee, rather. But Daryl is not. He's just a member of the public.
Yes.
Well, let's get started with our first clip as we go through the interviews.
Kevin?
Daryl, how you doing?
Hey, how are you doing? Good, good. Hey, are you going to go out there to Virginia with them?
I am.
Good,
I'm one of the riders.
good.
Speak about when they say they want more riders involved.
Yeah, well, because, you know, most of the people on these boards are all millionaires. Vicki Reinhardt, she's a public... Are you a millionaire?
No, I drive that rusty minivan out there.
Thank you.
So that was Terry, correct? That you were
Terry
speaking
Tao.
to at the end. Okay, okay. Well, at least she has good humor about her. That's excellent, and she wasn't afraid to speak with you either.
Right.
Which oftentimes what we find is so often is that candidates for office or those people who are in office get a little gun shy about actually speaking to anybody who might want to take what they have to say to heart. So let's continue with the interview as it progresses.
A pleasure to meet you.
Nikki, nice to meet you. I love
Yeah, well,
Nikki's a
don't we
great
all?
person.
You know, they stole that election from her.
I
Ramsey County.
Maplewood, I was like, I had
Okay.
parents go support her.
Absolutely.
I vote for her.
And, you know, she won that election, and it took him 3 times with the help of
Really
corrupt Ramsey
frustrating.
County.
That was so frustrating.
Yes.
It was very frustrating.
We'll be back.
Yes, good.
And you
Count me in.
That's all I can say.
right.
I'm in. I'll get my parents.
Well, the problem is, you know, to win against if the county acts corruptly like they did in that last election, then good luck.
Well, I mean, yeah, but you know, I think it's a good county. You know, I do admit the process was a little strange, but I'm glad she's back. Continue fighting because I'm gonna.
Yeah.
So she did say that she thought the election was a little strange, but you noticed in the background they're walking by you, not actually stopping to say hi when they clearly know who you are, is the appointed Mayor of Maplewood, Marley Abrams, and oh, lo and behold, County Commissioner Victoria Reinhardt.
Directly behind her.
Yes.
Flipping out.
Well, they of course are trying to ignore that you are actually there.
They're not interested in giving any statements, explaining any of their votes, giving a reaction to anything. It's amazing how many public officials there are, or elected officials like Commissioner Vicki Reinhardt, do not want to have any questions. And a question generally would be a follow-up of statement they made or conduct they made at the meeting. They're not interested in giving explanations. They're not interested in any way their authority being challenged.
Yes, well, let's continue.
And, you know, they appointed 2 people. They could have appointed her. Instead, they appointed people who have never been involved in an election. They appointed Sylvia Neblet, and William Knudsen. And they ranked her as one of the last persons to appoint. That's the mayor there, Mary Abrams. I mean, they could have just given her the seat because she won the election legitimately anyway.
And then she would have ran again in 20.
And it's good that Nikki Valasencio, because that's who they're talking about, who the election was stolen from, and we covered that on last week's program, it's good that she's going to be running again, but then to brush away all the inadequacies of the past election or the process or the actions of people involved in it, it's not sufficient just to say, well, she's going to run again, and we'll just brush all that other aside. That, to me, is just doing a disservice to learning from the problems that have occurred.
And of course, one of the roles of elected officials are to protect our democracy, because our democracy is very fragile. And it's very important that the people who are the people's choice consistently, first and foremost, look at that as a high value and a principle. But of course, even more importantly, because everybody knows power corrupts, that the challengers take to heart that they are actually become the protectorate, the shield for democracy, the shield for people's representation. Because you certainly know there's a lot of forces that the powerful continue to want swords to keep the election illegitimate, to keep it in the can, and to keep the public in their proper place.
Well, there's more to the interview, so let's continue.
Here's the thing too, like it's really,
The only, yeah.
so what I do is I actually work with government sometimes in my day
Okay.
job, and so it's really important to talk about what criteria people use to make those decisions,
Right.
right? Because if you, yeah.
There was no transparency.
Yeah, and I think that, yeah,
We
really,
don't know what the criteria was. They wouldn't tell us.
I've been doing with the state, with the counties,
Right.
to really push for transparency, and it's actually gotten better off for everybody because of the work that I've been doing. And
Well,
so-
thank you for doing that, because
But transparency is good.
Daryl, that is sitting there that you see on the left side of the screen, he is the partner to Nikki Valasencio. So he is very involved in this whole discussion because he, of course, was living through the election, through the recount, through the coin flip, through the loss, all of that. And so he agrees that there was no criteria that was used by, that he was told about, by the Maplewood City Council when it came to how they were going to appoint people to the vacancies that were on the Maplewood City Council after the election was over and done. And as we covered on our previous news program, the reason there were vacancies was because Mayor Nora Slawick was appointed to the Metropolitan Council. Tu Zhang won his seat to be a state representative. And then the City Council, before the first of the year, repealed the city ordinance that would have required a special election to fill those vacancies. So it meant that the cabal of 3 that was remaining, that they could then appoint whoever they chose. And that was one of the main points of contention of both Nikki Valasencio and, as we hear now from Daryl, that there was no criteria that was outlined as to how they decided who to appoint or who to interview. And as we heard from Terry, she believes that having a criteria established and following a criteria is important because that's what she does in her day job. So as a person who's running for office, isn't it nice to know that she believes in criteria? Mr. Berglund.
Well, hopefully that the glove fits well, and that in her campaign, and if she's elected, she continues to hold those values high, that you have a public criteria and then you measure yourself by that public criteria. So often, at least when it comes to Ramsey County, they say they're accountable. Accountability means that they set up certain, I guess it means they have some sort of measurable criteria. But of course, once they're elected, that's all out the window.
And that's why it's good to have this type of film footage in advance of the election, because let's say that Terry does win the election. And let's say that we want to know whether or not if she practices what she preaches. Here we have the video.
Because at least in the Ramsey County case, the criteria generally is, in the Maplewood case, the criteria is what we say. Our decision is based on what we have the power, we do what we want to do, and it's legitimate and it's right. And the criteria, the reasoning is because we want it to be that way. This is what we want it to do. No further discussion, no further conversation, certainly no challenges by anybody. We've just, in the Maplewood case, they just outright eliminated public input because they don't want anything they say, anything they do to be challenged, to be questioned, to be scrutinized in any way. Accountability.
Well, an analytical approach or a criteria and then measuring things against that criteria might actually produce a different result than what they want to do. And that's part of the reason why it's not done, because they don't want to take that chance that it won't prove up what it is that they want to do. And that's the whole issue. Well, let's continue.
Are you like in District 6?
Yeah, so I'm also a candidate for public
So
office.
Nelsie is your opponent, right?
So yeah.
Okay.
I'm very good friends with Nelsie, but I have not financially supported her because I know some people that are really supporting you.
Yeah.
So we kind of
What are you campaigning for?
City Council in Ward 6. So there's
Oh,
actually
good.
going to be
Oh, Ward
5
6
or
in
6
St.
people.
Paul.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's actually 6
Who's the
stops
current
here.
incumbent?
There had been somebody there who resigned. And
Okay, yes, Dan Bostrom.
Yeah, Dan
'Cause he was-
Bostrom had been there.
Okay.
But there's an interim now. and
Okay.
So,
Is he running again or?
The interim shots run is running. But, and is also extremely homophobic. So,
The guy who's currently in there, who was, appointed, he wasn't supposed to run. He said that he wasn't going to run when the election came up, but it turns out that he is running. And let's continue.
there's 5 people running in the race.
Okay,
But
good.
I think that that's a good opportunity for the east side. But
Right.
we also have the reason, I was asked to sit on this even before I ran for office.
Okay, good.
But, because I actually live right by I live like 1 or 2 blocks from the Vento line. My kids.
Thank you. Yeah, so you know exactly what's going to do. They're going to clear cut it, and they're going to put cyclone fences up, and they're going to say, "This is your wonderful trail." You know, Sue Veno. That's the last husband of Bruce Veno.
Oh, yeah,
Bruce
we
Veno.
got boards together.
Yeah,
I know Sue.
Bruce Veno. That was a mark because he was a true environmentalist,
Yeah.
unlike Betty McCullum. He worked every day for the environment. You may have never met him, but now they're going to take. That was a trail to commemorate him, and now they're just going to clear cut it down and plant some bushes
It's going to be concurrent along to the trail. So
with a cyclone fence.
Yeah.
well, only until they
Yeah.
get it constructed, and then
Yeah.
then that fence is going to go down.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think the fence is going to go down because people will get onto the
It is. I am like it is people's backyard. So I do.
It is.
And then it's 6 stops from my neighborhood. But we really need the transit. You know, we are very isolated in Ward 6, and so in terms of transit, even getting to downtown is a hardship. So we really need. And the thing about it coming through the Maplewood site is a lot of people, like my mother-in-law, go to specialists and to the doctor.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, and
Now, we heard a lot of drinking of the Kool-Aid in that statement. First of all, we hear that Daryl is convinced that there isn't going to be any fencing along where the BRT is going to go up and down the Bruce Vento Trail. And yet we know that there's got to be some kind of barriers to keep the pedestrians, to keep the bicyclists, to keep the wildlife off of the concrete, bituminous roadway that the BRT is going to go up and down supposedly every 10 minutes. Then we hear Terry giving the same mantra that we heard just earlier in the meeting about how the BRT is going to address the isolation of the east side of St. Paul. Has anyone ever thought of the east side of St. Paul as being isolated? She also talks about how it's going to be important to get the elderly to their health care specialists up by the Maplewood Mall. Now, if you don't recall our clip from a few weeks ago when the marketing guy was talking about the talking points for the BRT, well, let's just take a quick look and see if we hear the same words.
Values of communities along the line. What are the values of the region? What are the values of, that relate to the rush line? What are the challenges? Challenge words are, words like isolation, or an inability to get to a job, or, difficulties getting to health care. So, those are some of the challenges that people face.
We know from covering this and looking at the routes and looking at the stations, we know that the BRT is not like metro mobility. The BRT is not going to be stopping at the door of each and every one of those clinics and healthcare providers. Now, Mr. Berglund, I know that you took care of your dad for a long time. He was elderly, and even though he was certainly able to walk on his own a lot, would it been feasible for him to get off at a BRT station and walk 3 blocks to a clinic? with a walker.
Wow, there you go. Now, isn't that the perfect example? Of course, that would have been virtually impossible. And it's foolish and foolhardy to say that that is in any kind of solution. Now, Metro Mobility, of course, Metro Mobility stops at your house and drives you to the clinic that you need to drive at. So at least for the elderly who have mobility problems, to try to maneuver all the impediments and all the blockages. I mean, even if you do have sidewalks, the lack of curb clubs, the problem with this, the lack of direct routes, there's 1,000 of them that stand in the way.
Well, and to get to the BRT station, in order to get on the BRT, let's say you are a senior within 3 blocks of that station trying to go to your clinic. You have to figure out how to get to the station, because maybe you can't walk those 3 blocks. Maybe you can't walk those 3 blocks. Maybe you could walk 3 blocks with your walker, but then when you get to the end, you're going to have to walk another 3-4 blocks. And then that's too much. And then keep in mind, you got to do that again just to get home. And so does that seem feasible that they keep saying this mantra that we're going to use the BRT to get seniors to their health care?
And of course, I've never heard any statistics, any examples of where that ever occurs. There must occur sometime. They must be able to find somebody in the pack who actually functions that way. But the way that I see more elderly people with trouble with mobility, personal mobility getting around, is either Metro Mobility, or they get rides from people who share, or they find a taxi, however they derive that. It seems like what they're implying there, their talking points, I guess, is somebody's going to take a taxi from their home to this bus line, get up on this bus line, which I'm assuming there are steps on almost every bus, and then they're going to get off the bus and take a taxi for the rest of the way.
And you
or
know,
an Uber or whatever.
Right. Well, because they're not going to be able to walk it.
Right.
But they miss that part. They miss that step. How do they get from their home to that station? That's what they miss. That's the connection they miss. And they're not getting in their car to drive to the station. If they're going to be able to get in their car, if they've got a car and are still driving, they're going to get in their car and drive to the clinic. They're not going to drive to the station so they can get on the BRT, so they can go there and then walk 3 blocks. If they're still driving their car, they're going to get in their car and they're just going to go there. So to me, it sounds like really a false story, and they all keep repeating it over and over again, hoping that that will somehow make it true. You know, like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Just click your heels together 3 times and it will be true. It will be true. We will go home.
And of course, this project, which they're going to, one of their big points is they're going to help elderly and mobile people get to their healthcare specialists. I mean, if you can get they at the very least say that to have this dedicated line, part of it's going to be a dedicated line with all these hundreds of tons of concrete they're going to pour, is going to be, at least in kind of just passion conversation, they kind of say maybe $500 million, but I think in all practical purposes it'll be $1 billion. If you're going to dump $1 billion into something, and that doesn't even talk about the operating it, you think it would be just as easy to use a sensible system like Metro Mobility, or subsidize people to take an Uber that has ability to take people who have challenges, like are in a wheelchair or have mobility problems.
Absolutely, absolutely, and
which they would prefer to take anyway.
Well, because it's more personalized. It's more personalized, and they can go directly to where they want to go. There's not all these other stops in between. And let's continue with our next clip.
If they want to run it on Highway 61, so people can go to jobs, because there's going to be no jobs in other people's backyards.
No, but here's the thing though, because I worked on Central Corridor too, and so I was on the city of St. Paul.
Were you supportive of that Central Corridor? Because I know it took a lot of Hmong businesses away.
Well, it actually didn't close as many, and I sat on the board that defended it, that was
Okay.
mitigation. We filed a complaint.
Oh, you sued them?
We did file a complaint with the FTA.
Oh, yeah.
But it's all about mitigation, right? If you don't file a complaint, no one.
Right.
So let's just sue to find a solution rather than deciding in the beginning whether or not if it's the right thing to do. This idea about, well, we're just suing to defend the project. I mean, that's in essence what I heard that to be, is that we're suing just to find mitigation so we can justify the project. Not because we're suing because we're defending the rights of all the people who lost their businesses. We're just trying to mitigate. And that, of course, is exactly what we hear about the environmental assessment that's currently underway with regard to the BRT of the Rush Line, is that that environmental study isn't to determine if it is the right location, if it is the right thing to do. It's only to determine how to mitigate it so that they can ramrod the project into the neighborhood and try to put a Band-Aid on it so you complain a little less.
And I think, again, unfortunately, it shows what decision makers look at. We do whatever, one of their primary and first roles is to think, we're going to do whatever we want to, and if somebody has a problem, let them sue us. And if they can't put together the money, if it's in a low-income community, if it's under the other side of the tracks, and they can't sue us, or they don't have the energy to sue us, or they don't even know how to sue us, well, tough luck.
Right. Well, in a very similar kind of a scenario in Maplewood, when they were rerouting Jarvis Avenue over there, when they were reworking the English intersection off of 36, they wanted to do some reworking of Jarvis. Well, there's a certain part of the neighborhood that didn't want that connection to go through their neighborhood because, well, they had lived there a long time. They're not immigrants, and
Bigger
you know,
homes.
and one of them was a former council member of Maplewood, and bigger homes. Oh yes, you
Government
know,
jobs,
you get the
administrative
picture.
jobs.
And so instead, what they decided to do, well, let's just reroute all that traffic around over on Viking Drive instead, which actually is taking a longer route, but will take all the traffic along Viking Drive, which coincidentally is probably 75% folks who are non-white. And yet, okay, are they able to fight the fact that all this traffic is going to go through their neighborhood? I had one individual contact me saying, well, how are we supposed to fight this? I said, the best thing you can do if you don't have any money is to go look at the comprehensive plan and see if there's anything in the comprehensive plan that might stop this plan from happening. Well, you know what? They actually found something in the comprehensive plan that put kind of a little bit of a break on it, but not enough, and that the project continued and all that traffic went right through their neighborhood, but there's no road traffic because it was stopped and it didn't go through the other neighborhood. So there you go. That's a good example. They do what they want.
Unless the community has the political pull, the resources, the money, the professionalism, the education, and all these other values to put a strategy up, including a big portion of it being a legal strategy to fight the decision makers, the government, to mitigate it a little bit.
Yes, or to move it
Otherwise,
aside.
Otherwise, you're at their mercy.
Right.
And of course, 61 is a very quick road from White Bear Lake to Arcade East Side to St. Paul. In fact, if driving from east up by Highway 96, by the waters there, if the lights are all in your favor, you can go all the way down, up there from 96 to Larpenteur in between 5 to 10 minutes. It's a very efficient way to travel. And of course, it's a corridor where there's all kinds of potential for economic development, economic growth. Of course, if you go through backyards and the back way, it's not only going to be slow, but there's not going to be any economic development, any economic growth. And if they mean isolation, meaning they're isolating means they're the other side of the tracks, east side of St. Paul, meaning there's no jobs, there's low income, there's high crime, to not find a way to bring people to decent, livable wage jobs, is that going to end any kind of isolation?
Well, here's the thing too, is that word isolation, if they are isolated indeed on the east side, and they've identified this, the Metropolitan Council has identified them as isolated, transportation isolated. Who has control over that? Oh, the Met Council, they are the ones in charge of the buses. If they wanted to have them less isolated, then have better bus coverage. Invest more in metro mobility.
Yep, and
there you go. Isn't that the solution?
Of course, what it does admit is that the Metropolitan Council, with their public policy, is actually failing. They have a decades long of failing. Now, of course, in my mind, isolation is just a code word for the other side of the track. That means, as I mentioned, a crime-ridden, poverty-rich area.
Yeah.
And of course, the best way to solve that problem is actually to create jobs. But of course, St. Paul is going backwards on that again. And so if you want to give people jobs by shipping them up to White Bear Lake or Forest Lake or northern that, where companies actually there can be companies that actually hire people because of property taxes and other issues.
Well,
for economic
except that then you have, Representative Peter Fisher, who, while I understand that the company that's been there a long time up in White Bear Lake, that is an industrial company that has a lot of jobs, Water Gremlin, and I understand that they've got some pollution problems. It doesn't help much when you got your state representative basically saying that they're the devils of the world and that you're not doing anything to figure out how to preserve those jobs and yet preserve the environment too.
Right.
You see, I just got an email from him about the horribleness of the Water Gremlin, which has been in White Bear Lake since I think 1929, it said, and that they are one of the largest producers in the United States for the connector terminals for batteries as well as sinkers for fishing. I find that very fascinating that they actually have these two very different types of products they produce. But they've been up there in White Bear Lake. They obviously are manufacturing and creating stuff. They're good paying jobs. And yet you've got a state representative who's vilifying them and yet not trying to say, okay, you've got good paying jobs. We got to keep those in place. How can we help to get these pollution issues under control so that you can still stay in business? Because if the government comes down on that company or there's other kinds of regulatory issues, it could put them out of business. Now you've lost those jobs. So now what do? Who's going to be riding your bus rapid transit? They're certainly not going to be able to go to Water Gremlin to go to work anymore. You see what I mean? It's a disconnect.
Right, yes, and I guess you would think that as a finishing touch, he should be trying to find mitigation, which seems to be the key word, instead of, as a public policy elected official, just being blazing fire and venom at a company that's actually creating incomes for families. And of course, in addition to that, is if the east side of St. Paul is isolated, I guess in some way economic, first of all, you have to if you're going to have a criteria, because you believe in criteria, you have to explain what that isolation means, because how are you going to have any criteria, anything's measurable, if you don't have actually established a criteria? Instead of trying to move people out of the east, meaning transport them daily all this way up there, away from their families, they would be working on finding practical solutions that would allow them to reinvent the east side, whether it's opportunity zones, whether it's lowering property taxes, where it's bringing people who have companies in there to hire them, instead of taking mom, shipping her way up to work at Polaris in Forest Lake, and then when her child is sick at school and they call her back, she has to come all the way back, deal with her child, then go all the way back up to Forest Lake. If that is not insane public policy, and to take that as the basis of your whole potentially $1 billion project, more going backwards. And it's more inequity, because isn't what equity is about? Trying to give more opportunity, more a fair playing people who are on the other sides of the track. Crime, poverty, lack of opportunity, to bring fairness to the, and if you're going to take that and put that on the table, you need to, I think you got to do more than just say, we're going to ship you up to work up in Wyoming.
The interview continues.
And that's what I told his wife. If you want to win that election and take it away from the crooks of Maplewood, you got to sue him. But she didn't want to sue him because it's a lot of money and it's a hassle.
Yeah, and it's okay. We'll run again, right? And I think that's the thing too. Is after 2 years, how do you have demonstrate results and then and get out there? But I think I that's the thing is like I was always supporting Team Nikki all the way, and my parents live in South Maplewood, so it's totally in the area too, because I think it was an at-large seat, right? Right. And so
Let me tell you another problem Maplewood has with the Hmong community. They redid Wakefield Park. You know where that is, right down there? Wakefield Park is on Frost and English. And they built a community center which nobody can use, like Hmong cultural, because it's too expensive. It's not, they took out the soccer fields and they put hockey arenas. And you know that 30% or more of people in the Gladstone area are Hmong? So, it just never ends.
It's a disconnect.
Yes.
There's a disconnect. That is such a polite way to say that, okay, you got your opinion about the government there. I guess there's just a disconnect. Except that it's more than a disconnect. It's actually done of conscious decision. It's not a disconnect. They know what they do. They know what they do. Let's continue.
He and I were very supportive of the Wakefield development. Yeah. And we were there during the grand opening, and we doing the programming was very much needed for the Park and Rec department, because Melinda, the city manager, she used her influence to take the community center and have the Y take over the management of our beautiful community center. And yes, the Y does a great job in soliciting membership. Our membership went up great, but they also tried to take over the nature center, the Maplewood Nature Center, and luckily it wasn't.
The Y did?
Yeah, it was for the.
So this is where we hear the first of it, that the city of Maplewood, and it isn't the YMCA promoting that they want to take over the nature center, because they don't do it unless somebody has approached them. And who approached them is City Hall. City Hall approached the YMCA about if they wanted to take over the nature center as well as the community center. So you see, it's a little bit twisted there, because the city government is giving whatever story they want to give, well, to Nikki Villasencio and to Daryl. And unfortunately, Daryl's actually drinking the Kool-Aid.
Well, what I don't understand of his logic, he said, well, they gave the Maplewood Community Center, Melinda Coleman, the city, Melinda Coleman, the city manager, she used her influence to give the community center to the Y. And boy, that's wonderful. And membership rates, I think he said rates went up. I'm not sure if he said membership or membership rate.
It sounded like membership rates to me.
Yeah, went up, so big deal. But boy, they're a great, wonderful institution, the Y. But, the Maplewood, I guess Melinda Coleman or maybe someone else tried to get the Y to take them. And, we're very happy the Y didn't take them. Because it's kind of like when we see what they did to the community center.
To take the nature center,
the nature center. Yeah, we don't want to see them do to the nature center what they did to the community center.
You just really don't know where it's all coming from. But what we got out of it is that there was a move by the Maplewood City Hall administration to shuffle off the nature center to the YMCA. Of course, we also know from our reporting that as part of the capital improvement plan, Maplewood has got all kinds of big dollars assigned to the nature center. So here they had this whole plan about how they were going to do capital improvements at the nature center and then give it to the Y, just like all the capital improvements they did to the community center building and then give it to the Y. I think that that's corporate welfare, government welfare for a nonprofit selectively over other nonprofits.
Well, and why does the Y get this preferential, favorable treatment when other community organizations get nothing? They aren't even alerted that there's a ball game playing on. Of course, in this case, they didn't alert any of the normal citizens who maybe just follow the newspaper or their little newsletter. That's a huge issue that Maplewood has, is choosing their favorites, their buddies, giving them all kinds of perks, and letting taxpayers of Maplewood pay, and let other people not even compete for the same favors. That's what they call ending inequity in Maplewood.
Yeah, certainly, if you're going to be having one nonprofit do something for the government, you should have it put out as a request for proposals for all nonprofits that are interested, that they can put in their proposal to say how they could run the community center or how they could run the nature center or how they would do X, Y, or Z, so that way the government's not playing favorites.
Every community organization, every nonprofit, one of their favorite kind of clients to have is the government, because the government pays their bills because they have the money to pay their bills. And if they don't have the money, they just find money somewhere else to pay their bills. So it's the dream of every community organization, every nonprofit. Oh, the government, we're going to have the government as a client?
Yeah.
We're winning. Because we will be having money coming in.
Yes, that's right. That's stable and dependable and predictable. We don't have to worry about bill collecting. Okay. Well, let's continue.
There were a lot of public employees that had good, sustainable jobs. The Y took over and got rid of every single one of them and put low-wage people in the positions at this center.
That's the thing, is did the city say it was just a cost issue? Did they even come
What it was
North Sawwick was on the board
Yeah, what it
of the
was
Y
they
in
wanted
the
to
past.
save the roof because the roof was leaking. So the Y came in and said, we'll put a new roof on.
But it was paid for by Maplewood residents.
I know. I was like, you just bombed for that, people.
Right.
It's a roof over your community center.
Right, yeah.
Right. So then when they put the new roof on, then the Y said, we'll increase your membership. Let us control the community center for just a couple of years. And then what they did is every time their contract would come up, they would extend it another year, but they wouldn't even bring it before the
that's unfortunate.
before the Parks Commission.
Yeah.
So Nikki was like, when we started hearing about the nature center, we were like, no, let's put a stop to it. So they abruptly took that off the agenda. What was it, a couple weeks ago?
Right.
And now it's the Y doesn't no longer want to touch the nature center because
That's right.
Good.
and it's because of the phone calls that we
Right. No,
we
thank
were
you.
getting.
Yeah, thank you.
Organizing matters.
This whole thing about the roof, this is something we've covered in past news programs, because we went to the meetings where initially the YMCA was holding community meetings with members to talk about the transition. And we have film footage where the YMCA said that as part of that transition, the YMCA, was going to be putting the new roof on the community center. They said it, we have the film footage. Then, after negotiations with the city, guess what the contract really says? And we have that too. The contract says the city of Maplewood pays for the new roof. So you see, you all have to read what the documents really say, not what people are giving lip service to, because we know what the contract says, and that's what it is. And not only that, Maplewood, as we've reported, continues every single year to provide a financial contribution to the YMCA under that contract, and the YMCA gets to keep all revenues that are generated from the community center, not just the memberships, but also the revenues from the theater group that use the auditorium. And the birthday parties, by the way, they get to use that revenue too. Maplewood doesn't get that. And the YMCA, they got the customer list of Maplewoods. That's not Maplewoods anymore. In a business transaction, when you sell a business, if you give up your customer list, that entity that you gave your customer list to, they're not your manager. They bought your business. They took your business because you gave them your customer list. That's not a management company.
And of course, that is what's really of value when you sell a business. And of course, this Maplewood Community Center still is on city land, and the maintenance of that city land is still the responsibility of the taxpayers of Maplewood. The plowing is done by the city of Maplewood. And I think if somebody slips on the sidewalk, the liability is probably on the taxpayers of Maplewood. So I'm listening to the tenor of Darrell here, and although in the beginning, as a kind of a throwaway comment, he said it was wonderful, but as he goes on, I think you listen to it and you make your own decision, because that's all the information we base it on. He is disparaging the YMCA for the kind of, whatever they're doing over there at Maplewood. And it would be like, we would like to have an in-depth conversation, because I think it's common knowledge that what the Y is doing is not that wonderful. There's a big contingency of Maplewood who said the Y from the Maplewood Community Center was a big white elephant, and they're just happy to get rid of it. But I don't think they realize the big obligation they still hold, and the inaccessibility, even more inaccessibility they have to use the building built with their funds on their land, whose property is maintained by them, and whose property taxes have to go up because new parking lots and maintenance have to be done, and a new roof has to be put on.
And in part, that is the reason they had to build that pavilion there in Wakefield Park. It was because Maplewood, under that contract with the YMCA, for the most part, can't even use any of the meeting space in the Maplewood building that's the community center, the YMCA. So they had to build another building so they've got some rooms they can meet in.
And of course, what is paramount is that Maplewood, again, seemed to close their eyes to inequity. Everyone knows that the Hmong culture likes to have big family celebrations and parties in public parks, and yet, because of the cost, the size of the location, the size of the parking lot, they're not even able to use this community center. And I see very few Hmong kids playing hockey.
Right, that's right, it's the wrong sport. And I think there's about 10 parking spaces.
And for all demographic trends in Gladstone, all the Hmong families who continue to want to escape St. Paul, want to come over to Maplewood, and that's rising the demographic rates of Gladstone. And instead of being supportive of this trend and servicing it, they turn the city coffers against it.
Right. You mean the City Hall
City Hall.
administrators do, that's right. And their elected officials. Well, we have time for one more clip, and then we'll be closing out with the remainder of the interview.
Back room now, because 3 out of 5 of the members on the Maplewood Council. By the way, on that central corridor, I still talk to on almost a weekly basis, and among members who, when they drive by there, they look at their train, it's empty, and they said, our family had a restaurant there, or we had a restaurant there, and they look at, nobody's using that central corridor.
Actually, that's not true.
Well, they look, with their own eyes, and now I look every time I drive there by.
See that, but it exceeded.
But see, a lot of that is from the University of Minnesota campus, from the East Bank to the West Bank. I mean, just.
I work right outside
Okay.
of the office, so there are people using it, and so that's the thing
Okay.
there. Yeah.
There are people using it. Well, certainly there are people using it, but there were people using the bus too. And the question is, are there any more people using it than were using the bus? Let's continue.
Oh, you work for. Well, no, Daryl is a real activist. He's the one who should be on the council because Daryl has no problem getting up and expressing himself. Nikki sometimes is more reserved. He would have sued him. He would have sued Ramsey County when they stole the election. But Nikki didn't want.
We had a lawyer ready to go.
Right.
And everybody was ready to go. And Nikki told me, back off, back off.
Right.
And I was like, okay.
Okay, and in a lot of ways, sometimes I will tell you this too. And I know this, going, eyes wide open, because I have a much more high-profile seat in the city of St. Paul. Is that you still have to work with folks, right? Because she's still 1 vote out of 5, right?
Right.
She still has 4 people who could override her vote.
Yep.
So,
But being a strong advocate, it's huge because one person can make a difference. This idea that one person can't make a difference, I think, is false.
Oh, absolutely. But I think.
There is value to having diversity of viewpoints on a council. It shouldn't be that everybody has the same viewpoint because the community is made of many voices. They're not all going to have the same voice. And so your elected body should not all have the same voice either. Well, Mr. Berglund, I want to thank you for being here, and our viewers, thank you. We're going to be closing out the remainder of our program with the last of the interview, and we'll see you again then next week with more news. Bye-bye.
By the way, I seen what they did. Did you know Daitel?
Oh, yeah.
They harmed him too. They went off to nail him down. He ran for mayor, and he would have been the mayor if the old Hatchet Committee didn't go after him.
Yes and no.
I was doing.
I like Daitel. I thought he did.
thinking for him during that time.
Yeah, it was kind of, it was rather unfortunate. I mean, it was just, and the numbers.
You're endorsed by Take Action, I assume.
No, unless she works for them, so that's fine. I'm
So I
not.
won't give it to you, but.
It's okay. They had a process. I screened with them.
You screened, so you knew you weren't going to get it.
Well, but I still went to talk to them to say, I
Okay.
mean, a lot of the things ultimately is there are things we care about, right? There are things we care about in St. Paul. There are things we care about, that extend to the areas, too, particularly Maplewood, because I lived with my parents up here for a while, and so, I mean, it's just, we all know regionally these things matter, and so, but, it'll come down to, it'll come down to doors.
Where are you on the garbage issue?
Just tell you.
I support municipal hauling.
No, but where are you on the system you support? Because they lost in court St. Paul for having a rigged system.
They're going to expediting it. They're expediting it right now to the Supreme Court to see because they need to know by a certain time if it needs to go on the ballot or not, frankly. So we're waiting to hear in August, actually, whether it goes through. I support the municipal system because it is less trucks on our streets, and we have a 200-year backlog on our streets in St. Paul. So 200-year backlog. That's how long it would take to, by the time we get to all the streets, to repair them all.
Right.
Because, I mean, we have 25% of our land is tax-free because we're the capital city. So my platform is a lot about how we increase tax base, a lot of those local dollars, right, and make neighborhoods local again. And I also have kids who walk to the bus
Yep.
I'm relieved there's not 7 trucks walking
Right.
down the street, frankly.
Where are you on that? Wait, nobody knows what's going on in Hillcrest. What's going on in that Hillcrest
there's
golf course?
actually-
Are they going to have jobs there? 1,000 jobs, full-time jobs, or are they just going to be construction jobs, temporary?
Well, no, actually, when the Port Authority buys it, people don't realize the Port.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl.
Yeah, and I need to round to it too. The Port Authority's covenant, when any business opens there, is they have to hire locally, or those businesses
Right.
pay a fee, and they also have to pay livable wage jobs.
Okay.
I want to make sure those jobs go to East.
Yeah,
Sears.
thanks. And those aren't construction jobs,
No, those
temporary, those are...
the ongoing jobs,
Okay,
the tenants that come in.
Because I know that there's a
Yeah.
lot of Hmong families
Yep.
who, they have a lot of people in some of the households, and there's a lot of unemployment.
There's a lot of
Or
young men
wait,
who need jobs. I have
Yeah,
lots of
on the east
cousins.
side, and St. Paul has
Absolutely.
neglected all jobs on the east side of St. Paul.
Absolutely. They need to. So that's one of the things too, is that people don't realize that's been the power of the covenant, and they have not always done a great job. The
Port Authority?
locally, yeah. And so there's actually, and a lot of it is, I mean, admittedly, there are a lot of folks on the east side who have criminal histories, but we can still employ them. It just takes a longer horizon.
Right.
So right now, if we're developing,
Why is there so many people in criminal histories on the east side?
well, it's just, I mean,
Okay.
people do things. They
Okay.
feel brave, they get drunk, they drink and drive, and boom, there you go, right?
Right.
And then, I just think, it's just human behavior.
Okay.
You do some silly
Well, I'm just down in Highland Park.
Yeah.
They all have jobs down there. They work for the county. They work for the city. They're not worried about crime. And the east side, they don't have jobs.
Yeah, and part of it too is I think for 22 years, particularly the last 4 or 6 years, Boston really didn't do a whole much supporting the neighborhood. We could have gotten a lot more money, a lot more
Right.
advocacy, and so I think that's the thing too. Is I'm like, projects like this we absolutely need to support, because this is about what we know, and why this is also related to the point on 61 is we know when it runs through Frost. Do you know that the community there and the owners there are already thinking about how they can redevelop their buildings?
Frost in English?
Frost and English, right there. Some of the
Which
owners
ones?
there are already thinking
Which
about,
ones? The grocery store or
yeah,
the...
not orchards, but there's some interest in the.
Are in that liquor store? Are they?
I don't know.
I don't know. There's not that many businesses. Barber shop? Or,
Yeah, but that's the thing is, if
Are they going to take that Hmong funeral home? I mean,
I don't know if
Are
they
you-
can. I don't know if they can, and so because very few people are willing to use. I mean, as it should, eminent domain is really kind of a last resort. But I will tell you this: if this is the same argument people had of why didn't we have the train along 94? Is because then it really would have been just shooting people back and forth between Minneapolis and St. Paul. What we needed to do is put it on University so people could come through the neighborhood and people from.
well, there were jobs on University. There's
Yeah.
no jobs in the backyards of people in Maplewood.
Well, but it's bus rapid transit, and light rail is actually $1 billion. BRT is like just maybe 200 million. It's night and day
Okay.
in terms of the cost. Any light rail project is $1 billion, and just so much more longer. That's the thing.
Right.
Is it takes the feds forever to approve a light rail project. Southwest is still undergoing
Right.
a whole bunch of stuff. So
Well,
that's
I'm
why.
concerned that it takes longer I mentioned, it takes longer to get out to Maplewood Mall
Yeah.
on the bus rapid transit than it is on the street buses, which are slow already.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't know how long it takes to get on the bus now. Like 30 minutes, maybe, to get out.
I mean, I looked at those before. I know, like the Central Corridor, that's the thing they still mock about people. I mean, we're talking about people who are not part of, who are leaders, but are in the know. They mock that it takes longer to take the light rail than it would be to take the bus.
Well, that's a express bus, though. Should be.
Right,
It's an
yes.
express bus you're talking about.
It is. Yeah, thank you.
Get ready to recruit.
Okay, yeah, thanks for, hey, best of luck. Best of luck. I feel like,
Thank you, sir.
yeah, pleasure to meet you.
Almost need a bigger picture here. They're not really, they don't really show. See, I'm used to, when I think of busway, there's two versions I think of. There's the Snelling version, which is fancier bus than what you got now. And then there's the U of M version, which is definitely, this is buses and bikes, and that's it. It's corridored off. So that's what I don't know what in the end what this might look like. I mean, they got to have. They can't just have houses and then a busway. They're going to have to do something between the two things, and that's what I haven't quite figured out. Do they have any? Do they going to have a fence? Or are they just going to have a berm?
Those issues never came
Okay,
up.
because see, it was very easy with Snelling because you already had Snelling. All you need to do is put fancy bus shelters and dedicated buses.